All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. I am Caleb, one of your podcast hosts for you, and we have a special guest, Dreamcast McFly, and this is Find Your ID NYC's podcast, the Identity podcast, that is. And so this week we have all kinds of different things that we're going to be talking about for this week's show, but we're going to kind of talk about the housing market and the economy and with everything to do with that over time and how it's kind of evolved over time and where we are today and how that relates to America's identity and even our identities respectively as well. And then after that, we're going to be discussing all sorts of different things all over the place. So thank you again, Dreamcast, for joining the show. You want to go ahead and get started?
Yo, let's get started. So let's really dig into this housing market because you feel like it's evolved, which I do have to give it credit where it's due. But I feel like, especially for minorities, like we're we're not given the same housing opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could have I could have perfect credit. I could have better credit than someone, but they just check off that box on ethnicity. It's a little bit more likely to go to them,
Mm-hmm.
even in diverse places like NYC. It's like, how do we rectify this? No, like really, I want to know, how do we rectify
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that is a question that I think we have to answer, obviously. I mean, we're in a time now in 2020 with everything going on and with the kind of the Black Lives Matter movement in the biggest stage that it's ever been. I think that's a great question, and that's something that I think personally for where I'm at, as far as who I am, who I identify as, and the area that I'm at, is a question that we have to answer here, that I have to answer, that we have to answer all over the country and all over the world. And so, how do we rectify that? I think that's something. That I'm still trying to learn, and that's why I do enjoy the show, because I'm able to learn more and I'm able to understand better, because obviously at the same time I can't relate to you in those scenarios, in those situations. I mean, as you were saying earlier with the housing market, compare each other. You could have a much better credit. You could have much more finance in the bank than I do. And yet I could still walk out with a better opportunity than you in certain areas, if not the entire country. And I mean, that is exactly what you're saying. How do we rectify that? And I think that's something, well, first off, November, I think is a great
it? No,
a great first step to that. Obviously, it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but it could definitely be better in a sense, because if we do that one thing that we desperately have needed to do for years and years and years, but we could finally do it this November in 2020, is vote. That could really change things. What do you think?
whew, oh man, this November is definitely to me one of those elections that's going to be monumental on how we change things. Like given the scrutiny that Joe Biden's faced, I know he said some very ignorant comments. I know Kamala Harris definitely has a little bit of a shaky past.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things she said where I'm not really kosher with either, but I mean, let's break down the nitty and gritty of it. Like, if we continue on this path, especially with the weight of the world right now, sorry, the way of the world, and how our administration just failed to quickly respond to this virus, and now we're literally in last place on everything leading back to trying to get some kind of normalcy. We can't continue like this. Like, our economy really crashed. It's crazy to be in 2020 and we're actually experiencing a Great Depression.
Exactly. And to actually tie off of that with the economy, what I think is kind of funny, if you have a conversation with someone who's in support of our current administration and the moves that they're making, they tend to kind of go in the direction of, oh, the economy's not that bad. Everything's fine. And we're nowhere close to the numbers of the Great Depression. It's like, okay, we may not be technically close to the numbers of the Great Depression, but you have to realize that was 1929. This is 2020. Numbers are different in general. Our basis and understanding of math is completely different. Money is much, much more expensive, much more valuable than it ever was back in 1929. So to say that, oh, we're fine and the economy is fine is completely different than, say, what you were saying, really.
Right. No, I mean, there's no bandaging this thing up. Like, we are left with a deep scar and we need surgery right now. But once again, back to what you were saying, people really need to vote, and not just this presidential election. I mean, literally look at your local officials and research these people. Find out what they're about. I literally just voted for the Florida Council, and there are some people, like, even though I've never heard these names because I'm just back in Florida after spending last 4 years in New York. Being back in Florida, I've never heard these people, but immediately I'm like, what are you about? Why am I voting for you? And that's something people need to ask themselves on every level.
I completely agree, and I think that's something that people definitely don't ask themselves. Instead, I think people just kind of go with whatever the norm may be, the trend may be in their area. I think you have, or maybe even what their family votes, if you're maybe, say, of the younger generation, such as I am. So I definitely agree with that. And I think you can definitely tie, we have already tied in the fact with the economy, with voting, and how important that is, because that's going to not only change, that's going to change how this country handles the virus in our response. Because you obviously have one side that doesn't believe in it, and you have another side that says this is a real problem that we actually have to do something. And I think you coined it perfectly earlier. We're in last place. I mean, it's evident. All you have to do is go on to Google and search up, how many cases in the world, and then country by country breakdown, and you see the United States at first with 5.5 million, around there. So you have that aspect to it, and then you have the aspect of the economy itself. And obviously the economy is hurting. It is really rough. And then you have this housing market that we're kind of floating around here for today's show. And the housing market, to me, is going to be one of the more influential things, especially as I've done more research, because of what's happened in the past, such as the term redlining, as I mentioned earlier before the show, and as we mentioned last week's show too, is this term of where you have a map, and you basically, on the map, you can see where certain areas where different ethnicities and races are allowed to live. And as far as the African American, the Black culture, that culture is typically put into this red area, the dangerous area, as so it was presumed and deemed to be back in, say, anywhere from the 40s to the 60s. And now, obviously, it's not as prevalent to see it on paper, but the worst part about it is the fact that it's still plausible and it still happens to the day, even though it's not necessarily to that level. And so I'm curious, Dreamcast, on your thoughts with the housing market and maybe even personal experiences, how that's affected you as well.
Absolutely. So my personal experience, um, it's, it's really been like getting housing in New York is easily one of the most difficult things, no matter who you are. But definitely, I feel like if you're not well versed within your own community, you're automatically shooting yourself in the foot on trying to find housing. Um, and it's crazy. Like easily, Hispanic communities, Black communities, I've been able to get apartments with, but anything that where gentrification is taken over, they're expecting me to be making 40 times, 50 times the rent. They want a guarantor, even if my credit is 600, 700, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And if my guarantor is not in 900, then my application is getting denied. I just paid 150, 200, literally for nothing. And I feel like that's probably a lot of minorities' reality when it comes to New York, or just housing in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on a giant scale, I don't know. I feel like there aren't as many Black or Latino homeowners in in these areas where they've already let gentrification run its course and fixed up the neighborhood. It's, you kind of have to start wondering exactly who are you fixing up this neighborhood for.
Hmm. I like that. I really liked how you phrased that, and I like that question you posed. Obviously, and this is something that I said earlier in the show. Obviously, we can't relate to this aspect, and so that's why I'm so intrigued by what you have to say, because it's something that I'm trying my best to understand, if that makes sense. Obviously, I can't fully understand, but what we kind of discussed last week with Tarik and I on the show, we kind of talked about how in New York City you don't typically see a lot of homeowners in general. That is kind of a common trend in the city, and obviously here in Illinois, where I'm from, it's a little different. I'm outside of the city, so there is more likely to be someone to own their home, but you definitely see more of a trend of white homeowners than say Black or Latino homeowners in New York City, especially from the times that I've been to New York and from knowing about it and reading about it, and also from what you are just saying here. Obviously, that's a lot less likely, and it's kind of this rare category. Um, I guess you could call it that. And so it is for what you're saying with the housing market. It is something that needs to be fixed. But what I'm curious by, how do you feel it should be gone about? If you have any opinion on it at all. I'm sorry, Dreamcast, we can't hear you right now. Sorry, just a buzzing. Still nothing at the moment. Nothing. All right, sorry folks about the little technical delay there. I think we're getting the sound back on. I think your mic's muted. I'm not sure what's going on, but once again, you are listening and watching to the Find Your ID NYC podcast. I think we've got you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome.
Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Better than originally.
Okay, awesome. So,
sorry about that.
No worries.
But you were saying about the kind of what you think could be the right way to go for the housing market with everything going on.
It may not be completely the right answer, but I feel like a good step in the right direction is minorities having their own suburbs. In Florida, there are certain sections where, let's say, it's a Jamaican-based community, and they literally have all the houses in that 4-block radius, 5-block radius. And it's such a catch-22 because, in 2020, we want things to be integrated, but on the other hand, we're not given these same opportunities. So to have their own section of a city where they fixed it, and there's not high crime going on, because let's be real, crime really is a product of the environment. You take away the educational tools, you take away job opportunities, or not present as many job opportunities, and you don't reform people after you've wrongfully locked them up, what else do you expect?
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, and to go statistically correct right here, I actually was looking at something just the other day, an article, how that is statistically proven that when you take these opportunities, you take these amenities away from these communities, from minorities, of course the crime levels are going to go up. As you said, what do you expect? What else is there to happen besides for the crime levels to go up? So I agree with you there. And what I'm curious by, and as you said kind of at the beginning of the show, let's start from the past and let's, work our way to how it all happened. Say you've got this idea of the melting pot with Ellis Island and everything in San Fran, when a lot of the immigrants from Asia were coming over to San Francisco, and you've got these different cultures being welcomed into San Francisco and New York City respectively. So you have New York City and you have all these neighborhoods. And as you said, have a Jamaican community with their own 5 blocks, and that's that's their home where they reside, and then you have an Italian and Irish and so on and so forth. So I think that's where the government, where the United States went wrong, was instead of doing that, what you're suggesting, instead what they did and what they continue to do is they put them together. And you're putting cultures that have in history, most people know, very widely well known, that these cultures hate each other. They do not get along. And so you're putting them together, or you're simply just mixing bad juju, bad culture with one another instead of doing as you're saying, which I think is the right thing to do. But my thing is now, is it too late?
That is the question. You know, part of me is an optimist, and I want to believe like the world is moving in a place with more tolerance. But honestly, these last 4 years in America, as the country as a whole, we really showed our ass. Like in this day and age, in this century, like this is embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
Not to excuse any other parts of the world, but it's like the idea of America has always been to be a melting pot, but they just went the wrong way about it with this experiment. That's the way I look at America. It was an experiment. I mean, it definitely wasn't perfect at all, but
Mm-hmm.
I really feel like we can fix this. I don't know if it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when people from different backgrounds get on a medium and get to some kind of middle ground, we find out that we're not that different from each other.
I agree.
Me and you can talk for hours. We might find some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
We could be like, I'm not sure your background. What is your background?
So I'm from Central Illinois, kind of, Midwestern cornfield, Illinois. I am a senior in college. I've lived a good, respectable life, and that's, for me, that's a good basis of my background, and obviously yours is going to be much different. I know you said you went from Atlanta and then you moved to Miami, and I know you've been in New York for the past 4 years, and
Right. Yeah. So lived in Atlanta. Lived mostly in the South. You've lived mostly in the Midwest your whole life.
mm-hmm.
It's different backgrounds, but I'm sure we'll find some common ground. Do you watch Dragon Ball Z?
I haven't in a while, but I used to when I was a kid.
Exactly. We're not that different.
Not that different. Now I kind of want to watch it.
So I feel like people just have those conversations with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like just take down that barrier with each other. Shit might work out.
I completely agree. And to be honest, I feel that that's something that has been there. It's been on the table. It's been prevalent. It's been evident for years and years, but people just don't look at it that way. If that makes any sense, they don't look at it at that way. They don't really see all the sides to it, and they don't see that in the end we are equal. The color of our skin has nothing to do with it. As you said, there is common ground. We've both watched Dragon Ball Z in the past, and I'm sure we have listened to the same artist probably around the same time before, and I'm sure that we have.
You look like you like Radiohead.
I do like Radiohead.
You like Radiohead. I've been to one of their concerts. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
I'm pretty jealous. That's awesome. Yeah, I love Radiohead. I love all music, and I think that's something that, as we've talked about before, is that I know you have a lot of influences from all music as well.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Radiohead's definitely been a big one.
Hmm.
Kid Cudi. I mean, to a certain extent, Michael Jackson. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, it's not the music direction for me. It was the work ethic and being hands-on with everything. Um, wow, that was a little startling. Forgive me, guys. I'm in Puerto Rico right now.
He's having a lot better time than I am. I'm in Illinois.
I don't know, man. Where are you?
I'm in Decatur, Illinois, which is it's about 3.5 hours south of Chicago.
Okay, I've never been to Chicago. I'm sure it's a blast.
I mean, Chicago's a lot better than Decatur, but it's still it's a it's a good time. I'm here for college, finishing up my degree here, but yeah, Chicago is definitely an area if you ever have the opportunity to go to. I highly recommend. There's so many neat things to see and experience in Chicago, but and that's something I've always wanted to actually. I've been to like the Miami airport, but I've always wanted to go to Miami, and so when you said
I'm,
you live in Miami, I was like, that's so cool.
I'm telling you, do it. Do it for yourself.
Dude, okay.
Do it for yourself.
If we're able to get to a better time with everything going on as far as the virus goes, I will definitely try to book a ticket out to Miami.
Oh no, put caution to the wind. Go right now. Go to House of Mac. I'll meet you.
All right.
I'll
I
meet you.
I
We'll get overpriced mac and cheese.
I do like mac and cheese. I'll pull it up now as we talk, and I'll buy my ticket. How's that sound? I'll be there. I'll be there in like a couple days. I'll probably be the best available time. So,
I got you. I got you. Remember, House of Mac.
House of Mac. All right, I'll check it out. I'll check it out. But yeah, as far as this, yeah, really with with everything going on, I think I think what you said is I never even thought about that. And I think it's a great suggestion. Obviously, is there ever really a right way? I mean, that's a question that goes for everything you discuss ever. Is there ever really a right way? And so I think if you were to take different cultures and put them in their own culture, in their own community, I think that's something that they should have done from the get-go. But obviously, we're not. So we have to figure out, how do we backtrack into a good backtrack, because we're obviously backtracking in a negative way for just about everything else that you've got. I mean, we're just getting worse by the minute with the virus, and our response team, if that's even our response team is even a thing anymore for
Oh,
the White House,
there's,
because it really
there's too
isn't.
many viruses going on. Um, the the virus exponentially growing all throughout the U.S. We're at over 150,000 people in America have already died from this virus.
Yep, and it's counting
Um,
too by the minute.
the resurgence of Confederate flags spooks me out. Really spooks me out. And that's another thing to segue with housing. Like my grandmother, she was a Malagasy immigrant. Um, so my family's from Madagascar,
Mhm.
and she came to America, met her husband, wanted a big house, for me and my cousins, to inherit once she passed, and just keep passing through the generations. And because it was in a predominantly white neighborhood, can't say who. Could have been her neighbors, could have been cops. We don't even know at this point, but they put on the white hoods and they burned it to the ground. And that's another factor to why I believe it might be a good idea for us to have our own communities, because there's people, sadly, in this world, no matter how much love we try to spread, no matter how much knowledge we try to spread, no matter how much common ground, there's people who are stuck in their ways and they continue the cycle of teaching hate.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that is, wow, that is tough. That's difficult. I truly am so dearly sorry to hear that, and to hear of, to hear that dream, and to have that dream in the stages in preparation to become a reality, and then one day have it be taken away from you. I can't imagine, and I am so deeply sorry to hear that has happened to you and your grandmother specifically, and your family. And with what you said, the emergence of, say, the KKK, and of the Confederate flags, I think what's interesting, and I read a really neat article. I believe it was on the Atlantic. I think it was written a couple of years ago, but I read it a couple of weeks ago, and it had to do with, were the Confederate flags, and even, say, the KKK, were they ever really gone? I mean, obviously they weren't, but
no, they weren't gone. They were a lot more quiet. I feel like they were a lot more quiet for a little bit.
Do you feel like the media might have hid them a little bit as well?
Maybe. I mean, obviously they were still acting. Like, we can't be naive and pretend like they were just gone and quiet during the whole Obama administration. But we also can't ignore that they feel, I feel like I don't want to get too political in that. Whoever you want to vote for is whoever you want to vote for. But if we're going to be real, I don't feel like this administration condemns them. Not even nearly enough, like, at all.
I don't.
And I feel like with this administration in place, I would say not braver, but they feel a little more, people with that mindset feel a little more entitled to be vocal about their views.
I think, as far as the administration goes, I don't even think they condemn it at all. In fact, we've had these acts of terror and racism happen and occur, and the administration will come out and say this is an awful thing for all parties. And it's like, for all parties, no, one party was truly, they basically committed genocide, if you think about it. And so it's like, no, it's not all parties. It's horrific and horrendous for one particular party that continues to be affected by this. And so I don't even think they tried to condemn it. In fact, I think they just tried to bury the fact that this is even occurring, because it doesn't mean they're necessarily in support of it. It's more of the fact, although we could probably point fingers towards that. I think it's more the fact that they just don't care.
That is the sad reality. And it's back to, the thing about Biden and Harris. I can't confidently say that I believe that either of them care about someone like me and my issues in America, but I feel like they'll at least listen. I just watched the HBO interview with our current sitting president, and honestly, it was baffling. It took me 3 segments because it was really hard. It was really hard to watch. And then the final outcome of it all, and he actually brought up a very interesting question, was asking our current sitting president if he's ever even thought of sitting with someone from Black Lives Matter and just having a conversation with him or her. And unfortunately, the outcome was because of this view about police officers, I refuse to talk to them.
Really?
Yeah, that was the gist of how he brought that about. Was, oh, I heard this slogan about police officers and it's nasty, so I don't want to talk to anybody who does Black Lives Matter events. And that, you know what? It didn't surprise me at all. It was very on brand.
Yeah.
It was very on brand.
You just describing it to me, it was like, well, that it doesn't shock me. But it's more the fact that even though it doesn't shock you, it still hurts. Like, especially for you, I'm sure it probably hurt even worse at the fact that you can't even have someone who is supposed to be running this country support you and support all cultures, all races, all genders, everybody can't support you. And obviously we are imperfect human beings, but at the same time we can learn to understand and relate to each other as best as possible. As you said, that common ground, we all have that common ground in some sort of way. So it doesn't shock me that he said this. It's the fact that he's not willing to even give it a try is just depressing. It's disgusting. And that's why, to go with what you were saying about the other side, Biden and Harris, are they, again, imperfect beings? They have said and done things in the past that are very questionable. They've done things that a lot of people for the Black community I know has not very skeptical on Harris and different things that she's done in the past as a prosecutor for the state of California. But as you were saying, I think.
Oh, that's not even what made me distrustful of her.
Really?
Yeah. It was actually music related.
How so?
Oh, she came out and was saying oh, I used to smoke weed and listen to Snoop Doggy Dogg in college. And then it's it's an easily Googleable fact. You graduated college literally 5-6 years before this man was famous. And there wasn't internet to discover artists. So how did you do that?
Yeah. The lying. Yeah.
It's not even lying. It's just pandering. And it's
Good word.
You're already black. Like, you don't need to do this.
Mm-hmm. I think. Well, actually, I guess I'm curious. Do you feel that with that pandering, do you feel that she was just trying to find something to relate herself more?
No, I mean, she's definitely trying to make herself more relatable
Mm.
to the African community, but it's like, do you really need to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't care if you listen to Snoop Dogg. I don't listen to Snoop Dogg anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody does. Snoop Dogg doesn't listen to Snoop Dogg anymore. He's probably moved on. But just the fact, like, you felt a need to do that. And it's also a little bit scary because it's like the same kind of pandering behavior that I feel like Hillary Clinton like shot herself in the foot with
Mm-hmm.
when she was doing the whip and nay nay on Ellen instead of doing black dances, like listen to black people and actually take us seriously. Actually listen to our suggestions and
Mm-hmm.
actually listen to our pleas, like, and not just black people, but everyone. All of us are literally just trying to live our lives, be peaceful, and
Mm-hmm.
make it in this melting pot
Mm-hmm.
that we've all been thrown in.
Mm-hmm. I think with this melting pot, and as you're saying, just trying to live your life and just trying to be peaceful, do you feel obviously the Biden and Harris administration, they are more than likely, we can most likely speculate that they will be putting together an administration that will be not only well represented but also diverse and inclusive, more than likely. And I know that's something that the majority of the um, DNC, the Democratic Party, is pushing for Biden to kind of say, hey, you need to have this representation, and we need to show that we are looking for different times. And so I'm curious on what your thoughts are on that, and if you feel that that might help with the situation at all, maybe even help with your community and all communities in this country to live more peaceful and in a better life in this melting pot, as you pinned it.
Um, Definitely. I feel like I said before, the only reason why like Biden would even get my vote is because out of the two, I feel like that would be the more of a voice of reason.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that sucks for me to say.
Yeah.
It sucks. Given even recent comments that he's made, but just to have somebody who has
Think we lost you there, Dreamcast, as far as the feed in the mic. Once again, folks, sorry about the technical difficulties. Thank you for tuning in, though. Once again, this is Find Your ID NYC's podcast identity. I'm your host, Caleb, and trying to figure out what exactly is going on with Dreamcast feed. He is in Puerto Rico at the moment, so he is outside, so that could definitely be a factor to it as well. We are discussing a variety of different things for. Looks like he's gonna try to come back in, but we're discussing a variety of different things on this show, such as the economy, continuing with that, discussing the housing market, how that's relating to America's identity. And Dreamcast really wanted to focus on how we got to where we are now. And I think that is a great thing to to touch on real quick, or really just throughout the show. And through that, we've talked about different things with politics. We've talked about how that is affecting everything, the community in America itself. I think we are getting Dreamcast back online here. He's loading. But thank you again for tuning in and for bearing with us even throughout these difficulties. Greatly appreciate it. And I hope you all are enjoying the show. And quick reminder to Find Your ID NYC on Facebook, on YouTube at the X Shows, and on Instagram as well. And you can find us on the Anchor Podcast app under Find Your ID NYC Identity, the podcast. And you can find us on Spotify and Google Podcasts and even Pocket Cast if you're on that app as well for this podcast. Are you there, Dreamcast? I think he is still trying to load. But what we have been discussing, I think he's trying to come back in. But what we have been discussing for the show so far, again, has been a lot of different things as far as this basis of the melting pot and how America was created on that and as that, and this basis of the housing market as well. And that's something that we've been trying to touch on as well. And I think, can you hear me, Dreamcast?
I can hear you.
Yep. Yeah, we lost you there, but I just kind of went ahead and kind of gave the audience, our viewers, a little bit of a recap and everything that we've been discussing as well. So. You still there, Dreamcast? Sorry.
Oh, and you're here.
Yeah?
No, that need to.
What you saying?
Sorry, you're in and out with the feed, Dreamcast, just so you know. Once again, folks, apologies for the technical difficulties at the moment, but we are going to try and keep going with the show for a little bit. We are almost to the end as we start to wrap up here. But hopefully we can get Dreamcast back on for the final remarks of what we've kind of been discussing. Once again, about the housing market and discussing everything as far as with politics and the administration, the decisions with the administration and how that's affected the Black community and all communities and all ethnicities in this country and even across the world as well. It's definitely affected that, and how America, as far as the virus goes, has kind of ended up in last place, as Dreamcast coined it. And I think he said that perfectly. So we're going to try and see if we can't get Dreamcast on the line once more back on. If not, then we will try to wrap up the show here shortly for you. Once again, you can like us on Facebook, Instagram at Find Your ID NYC, and you can like us, subscribe, I should say, on YouTube at the X Shows, and you can find us on the Anchor Podcast app for the Identity Podcast, and on Spotify and Google Podcasts as well. We are working on getting us on Apple Podcasts, Apple Music within the next few weeks. I do believe there's a limit there for how many shows you have to have before we get on there.
Okay.
All right.
We're back.
You back?
All
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we can start to wrap up too, so that way we don't have too many technical difficulties.
No problem. Sorry about that. Puerto Rico is a little.
Not at all. You're fine.
It's still a little wild for me to say.
Yeah. No, you're fine. With everything going on, I mean, the Wi-Fi is constantly going out with everyone at home and everyone on their computer. So no worries about no worries. And you're also in Puerto Rico, so there's a big difference. And I know you're outside, so I'm sure the connection is very back and forth. So I apologize if I'm delayed at all as well. But we can go ahead and we can go ahead and start to wrap up. If you have anything else you want to tack on, by all means, please do.
Definitely. So we really tackled everything going on with this administration. Once again, everybody, like, no matter what, just make your vote count this time. Make your vote count this time. Come November, we got to see some kind of change.
I agree. And with that, reminder to all the listeners and viewers out there, there is the mail-in voting option. And I know there are lots of people out there, especially in our current administration, that are denying that possibility and think that's an awful way and all that. The mail-in voter fraud is very, very small. And that's something that I usually do is I mail in my ballot. I think it's a lot easier, more efficient. Right. And plus, with me being in college and living in another area, it's so that way I can still vote for my area where I'm from, but I can just do it at school by getting it mailed to me. So there is that possibility out there too. But I agree with you, Dreamcast. Vote. That's all you can do, because it's going to change the way life is right now, and it's going to change with the virus and the country's response on the virus. It's going to hopefully change everything with the Black Lives Matter movement in a good, positive direction. It's going to change the social climate that we're living in currently, and it will hopefully change this radical divide that we're currently in.
Yeah, definitely. And for the people listening, find someone different than you and find that common ground. Because honestly, all of this is really a sickness, and you don't get better unless you make the effort to heal.
Completely agree. Very well said, by the way. I would love that as like a quote or like a tattoo. But
I'll put it on a t-shirt for you.
Thank you. when I come to the House of Mac with you in Miami, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Dreamcast, for being on the show. If you have anything else to add, please do. But greatly, greatly appreciate having you on the show. And sorry for all the craziness as far as the conversation.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure. I apologize for technical difficulties on my end. But it is what it is. What could I do?
Yeah, and that's completely okay. I mean, last week I had the technical difficulties, so we're just passing it to the next person. So no worries there. By the way, you can like Dreamcast McFly on Instagram, correct?
Yes, I am on Instagram and Twitter.
Twitter, Facebook.
Actually, no, don't follow me on Twitter.
Don't follow him on Twitter, but you can like him on Instagram. Facebook?
Yeah. Facebook, yeah.
Yeah. All right. You can follow him on Facebook and Instagram.
Follow him, I don't think.
But not Twitter.
Yeah.
And you should check out you should check out his music as well. You can find his music on YouTube and on Spotify. I have listened to your music, and we talked about your single "Big Girl" about a month ago now or so. Time flies by. But you can check out his new single. That is your newest single at the moment, right?
Yeah, Big Girl.
Big Girl.
Yeah, it was a beautiful experience.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really need to get into that right now.
Maybe we'll have you on the show another time to discuss kind of the reasoning behind that song and everything that song stands for.
All right. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Dreamcast. Greatly appreciate it. Have fun in Puerto Rico. Hope you're having a good time. And thanks for sitting here chatting with me and for dealing with my my nonsense, my rants that I go on sometimes. So
it was a pleasure, my man.
All right. Well, I am Caleb, I am one of your podcast hosts for this podcast. Once again, this is the Find Your ID NYC Identity podcast that you have been listening and watching. We had their special guest, Dreamcast McFly, the Atlanta-born, Miami-based artist and rapper. You can like us on Facebook and Instagram on Find Your ID NYC, and you can subscribe to our YouTube page at the X Shows, and you can find us on the Anchor Podcast app, as well as Spotify and Google Podcast for this podcast. Thank you for listening, and that's all we have for you. So we'll catch you next week. Thanks again, Dreamcast.
My pleasure, my man. Stay safe out here.
You too. Have a good one.